So, of course, we have a debate coming up imminently. This debate is going to be foreshadowing of the bigger emphasis that we have going on in this race, which is basically who's going to get second place against Donald Trump and lose out in a blaze of glory. Now, we've got some candidates that we already know, some candidates that, by the grace of God, frankly, we've gotten rid of. Now, this is only going to have the titular 5 candidates. This is going to be Christie taking up like 80% of the mass. You've got Ron DeSantis, who is the guy in first place out of the 5 at like 15% of the polls. You have Nikki Haley at like 10%. You have Vivek Ramaswamy at a measly 4 to 5%. You have Tim Scott at like 3. So anyway, we're talking about a group of people. This is a diverse field. We have a black guy, an Indian, another Indian, lighter skin, better looking. You have a fat white guy, or I guess an Italian in this case. Then you've got another Italian in Ron DeSantis, but he's got blue eyes and he's like Leatherface. And so we have this race going on, and I want to kind of like get into your mind what you need to look out for this debate. We have some interesting dynamics. We have a race in which Christie, when I was reading off the polling numbers for people, I didn't even think of bringing up. So Christie, I don't even know how the hell he's still in here. He has about the same percentage in the polls as does Tim Scott. So Timmy over here and Chris have like 2.6% each in the RCP aggregate polling foundation. So which means in this case that of course they're at the very bottom. The other 2 candidates that were trying to run was Asa Hutchinson, who's known for having an Israel pin along with the American flag. And obviously, he's a horrible politician beyond that. And then you have another thing with Doug Burgum, who looks like a hawk. And this guy's from, I believe, North Dakota, something like this. And he's like this libertarian hardliner rich guy. But again, no charisma, just didn't go anywhere. When you have these fringe positions, you can get pretty popular. Ron Paul with the libertarian movement in 2008 and 12 had substantive things to say in the debate stage and actually had a good following at the beginning there over 10 years ago. Now even Rand Paul was bigger than Burgum. Burgum is like a fucking measly little peasant, little cousin to these people. And so that guy's out of it. And so we have a race that's narrowed down to 5. And then you have Donald Trump kind of like King of Thrones, King of the Hill, so to speak, just chilling out with the beer in the back, watching everything go down, and then shit posting on Truth Social, which is something I don't even, watch. What's funny is that you can have a Trump flag on your wall, yet you might not even read Trump's Truth Social. So I'm just begging the guy to go back on X.com. Anyway, we also have this other thing going on, which has to do with the dynamic between Nikki Haley and Ron DeSantis. Ron DeSantis, who in a particular sense has the lead, but only by 5 points, which is somewhat pathetic because if we remember, Ron, as recently as if you were to look on the polls, as recently as like March of, or even April of this year, so 7 months ago, was at 30% of the polls. He was 10 points behind Donald Trump. And then he lost it. He fumbled it. And you know what? Fumbling happens all the time. When you're young, that happens. But when you're 45 and you're still fumbling, I think that's a little bit more pathetic than whatever we do as college students. But what's even better than that, you have this guy in Christie, who, if I were to get off of my tangent for a second, he was somebody who probably is polling at 2 to 3%. But what's better is that he has big fat pigs, these pay pigs that keep him in the contention. There's a niche group of people that look like him. Okay, so these pay pigs, these like really rich robber barons in this more modern example where they kind of like the fact that he makes fun of Trump. And I will give Christie this. He's a really good politician, or at least he used to be. He was a Republican in New Jersey, so it's really impressive what he pulled off. Now, he left in disgrace, obviously, but I mean, when you're that fat, are you really expecting anything graceful to come out of his body? So it makes sense. Anyway, Christie is over here just pantomiming some sort of political acumen where he has these like sparks, you could say, where he's actually pretty smart and he's really witty and rhetorically gifted sometimes. But he's been falling off as of recent. But I think he's still leeching off of the clout he had 10 years ago, or even as recently as 2016 when he almost single-handedly killed Marco Rubio's career in 2016 in the presidential nomination race. And so he does have these embers from when he used to be a good politician, when he was maybe 15 years removed from a stroke. Now he's like down to like maybe 5 years until he strokes out because he's fat. Okay, so basically you've got that going on, right? I don't hate the guy, but I mean, it's just the truth. And so now we've got Ron DeSantis over here with Christie kind of just waiting in the wings, taking pot shots at Trump. Pence is gone. He quit. Remember last debate? It was completely, it was a floundering. The people there, when you have these debates, you get invitations to go to these places by people that you work by and stuff like this. And so Pence assuredly had a couple dozen people in the crowd that were literally working for him, salaried employees or interns, whatever. These people didn't even know when to clap for him. So obviously that's not a good thing. Anyhow, you have people like Ramaswamy who came out pretty smart, came out like, okay, well, in literal, like, phenotypically the shiniest turd out of all these candidates, and yet still couldn't muster up any sort of like a acumen past that first or second debate. So we're now like 4 debates in, and clearly he's been floundering in the polls. He used to be better off. What even happened to Ramaswamy? Ramaswamy at one point was doing decent. He was like at 7%, and he's down to like 4.4, and so he's lost like 50% of his support, which is to suggest that people are not taking him seriously, which is too bad. So he's like a groupie for Donald Trump at this point, and it's kind of pathetic because, he could have played his cards and he might have been the vice presidential candidate. Now he's looking for janitorial services at the executive branch of the government, which, for him, for that sort of person, I think it's not that bad. But I mean, for the rest of the candidates, that's somewhat emasculating, you would think. Somewhat beneath the pay grade of even Christie, who probably couldn't even clean a bathroom aside from maybe the urinal cake. So basically, you've got that going on. But then you also have another point, and this has to do in conjunction with the whole dynamic between DeSantis and Nikki Haley. Nikki Haley, who, to give her credit, is a decent politician. She actually answers things in a way that is kind of tailored for the suburban wine mom. So if you wanted to really win the state of Georgia, I think she'd do well. You want to win the state of Wisconsin, maybe a little bit, where the suburbs are. You can see how that could work out, Arizona, etc. So Nikki Haley could come off as palatable. The problem is with Nikki is that she doesn't, I don't even know how to describe it, but women run into an issue in politics where on one hand, you're nurturing and you're soft, and that could help you when you're trying to pander to women, when you're pandering to gays, when you're pandering to, abortion related topics. That makes a lot of sense. But when you're dealing with cutthroat politic, whereas Donald Trump, who's like the billionaire 6 feet tall, like, okay, I will knife you and people will respect that because it's alpha or whatever have you. Nikki Haley can come off like, this girl's actually a cunt, or this girl's actually a witch. And so that's what that's what Hillary Clinton underwent. And so that's why you got to be careful with that. So Nikki Haley in this case is kind of like in this weird predicament where she's going to savage and ravage DeSantis most likely, because politically speaking, she's a lot better than Ron. So you got to see how that works out. Now, there's some quotes that I have here for today that might actually contextualize this whole dynamic even better than you'd even expect. So if you look here, what you'll notice is that they will, so Nikki Haley will describe DeSantis, his campaign, as a sinking ship, which is true, right? He's down to less than half of the support he had before. 6 months ago, he was at 35% in the polls, and now he's down to 15. What's even better than that, you've got a quote by DeSantis calling her campaign a spoiler campaign, which only increases Trump's chances of running away with the Republican nomination. Listen to the verbiage right there. So again, these people are politicians. These people are trained middle-aged adults that are supposed to know how to rhetorically manipulate things to their benefit. And what's the best thing they can do is they can say that DeSantis is a sinking ship, which is true. And Nikki Haley's actually right to call him out on that. But here's DeSantis' folly. He'll say, well, Nikki Haley is a spoiler. Well, you only call somebody a spoiler when you're in a position to lose. That's not an affirmative action. You could say she's a distraction, she's a loser, she's a tumor, okay. But to say you're spoiling it for me, oh my God, you're gonna let Donald Trump run away with the nomination. It shouldn't be. If you're a good candidate, Ron, it ought to say you're letting Trump win by the skin of his teeth, not, oh, he's gonna run away with it. Instead of Trump beating me by 30, he's gonna beat me by 50. Well, you know what? That's actually pretty embarrassing if you're arguing about the margin of a defeat. You ought to be thinking of terms that are more positive. Otherwise, how do you get the buy-in, right? If a lot of people, look, if it were a 1-to-1 race, Ron DeSantis' support would go way up. Not because he's a better candidate in that circumstance, but only because the plausibility of him beating Trump goes way up. And so in order to benefit the sort of plausibility narrative, which is something that every person in 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 10th place need to do, is to ascribe to themselves a way of winning plausibly. And so if you're going to describe the other campaign as a spoiler and like making the margin of defeat even worse, then you're thinking in losers terms, and that's not going to work out for Ron DeSantis. And you can see just how well that's working out for him, where he's getting bitched on by Bill Maher and other people for wearing lifts and stilts, and where he has earlier on in Iowa when he's having his wife do all the rallies for him because she's a better speaker than him, and you're getting out-talked by your PTA mommy. At that point, it's pathetic. Here's another great quote. So basically, obviously prior to the debate, people are going to be asked by the press like, okay, well, Donald Trump isn't showing up, which obviously why would he even do that? He's winning, so why would he even risk having a stroke or something on stage? So then at that point, there's a quote, and they say, well, why is Donald Trump not coming? And then, also because he's being called out for having hidden heels or lifts in his boots to enhance his height. DeSantis says, and I quote, if Donald Trump can summon up the balls to show up for the debate, the governor said that he'd wear a boot on my head. Is that even funny? What's the point? Oh, I'm a manlet, but I'll take my lifts off if you show up, daddy. Like, what? Pathetic. So, in a recent CNN poll, which you can take with a grain of salt the size of Jupiter, 22% of likely voters in early voting South Carolina said that they would vote for Nikki Haley over the 11% saying they would basically vote for DeSantis in this case. And even as recently as like Halloween, the Des Moines Register, which is one of the premier sort of sources in Iowa, so the Des Moines Register shows that Haley and DeSantis were tied for second place against Trump with 16% of the first in the nation caucus state votes. So what that means is that the polls for the nation favored DeSantis by like 5%, of course, like 15 to 10. But if it looks like in person, IRL, it seems like it's more even. And so at that point, DeSantis isn't even the big dog out of the five. It's more like, husband and wife, but wife dominates the husband. That's the dynamic with DeSantis. So he's going to get towered on by Haley because Haley has more of like an entitlement sort of bitchy attitude. But in this case, it'll actually work, because DeSantis will get bitched on. And what's something that is interesting is that Donald Trump doesn't keep up a facade of like, oh, I'm a good guy or whatever. He just will go into Hillary Clinton and accuse her of shit and just not even care. So if Nikki Haley were to swing at Trump, he'd easily punch her and it'd work. Whereas with DeSantis, he has to like pretend like, oh, I'm actually a nice guy. Well, actually, I'm not like Donald Trump. I'm like diet Donald Trump. I'm actually good optics. Well, when you get ravaged by a woman and you get clawed, are you going to defend yourself? Probably not. Not only because DeSantis is going to like hold back because he's a bitch, but secondly, because he's also rhetorically not as gifted as Donald Trump, which would actually lend credence to the fact that he's not a good candidate overall for president. Okay? And so, I mean, that's just a very clear thing to note. Now, DeSantis clinched an endorsement by the governor of Iowa, who is known as Kim Reynolds. This is not going to make a difference, okay? And look at the pitch that she made. So basically, Kim Reynolds said that the Florida governor, Ron DeSantis in this case, is the only viable candidate to Trump, the only alternative. And that's the sort of campaign we're running, the alternative guy. Not even, well, Ron is cool, he's a maverick, he's a businessman. No, it's literally, well, he's the only thing that's there. Well, okay, so it's like Jeb Bush 2016. Great. Okay, now here's the last part for this video. So basically what's going to happen with Ramaswamy, Christie, and Scott. So these people are all three in the same cohort of like single-digit losers, right? The jabronis in this case. And so basically these three candidates are going to struggle to qualify for the next debate. So how Republican debates work is that with each subsequent debate every month, they will get harder and harder to qualify to get into. And so what'll happen is that basically they'll raise the restrictions up and up and up in regards to how much fundraising you need, how many donors you need, how many percentiles you get in the actual polls, which means that these people are going to die. It's sink or swim right now in November. December qualifications go up, which means that when Chris Christie is coming out with lines like, oh, Ramaswamy sounds like ChatGPT, or Donald Trump sounds like Donald Duck, that sort of shit won't fly, right? So Christie has had 8 years to come up with something smart for the Republican debates. Clearly, he hasn't come up with that. Hopefully, week over week, he's come up with something smart. He's going to need it. So if you see them acting a lot more hostile than usual, you'll know why. And so that's going to be the basic summary. So see y'all in the next video. Adios. Oh, wait. Nikki Haley's going to win the debate. My assumption. Okay, there you go. Bye.